I will start with this, that I think the future is better than we think. We tend to have this dark outlook because we're looking at all the possible things that could go wrong. And not being a scientist is quite helpful there, I suppose, because you can be a bit more naive about things. But we'll discuss that issue later. So I'm going to bring in David Wood. David is a great compatriot in the Futurist movement, the Futurist community around the world. And I've met him several times. Of course, he's in London, like many Futurists. He's the founder of London Futurists, and he's very active in the whole discussion about artificial intelligence. We often have disagreements on the singularity, transhumanism, but he's a good chap to have in the show. Welcome, David, and let's start with you and get some feedback or the first question from you, please.
Great to be here, Gerd, and well done on putting some very big, important topics onto the table, topics that need more of our collective attention. What I'd like to start with is asking, how is this treaty going to work, this non-proliferation treaty? Because I do agree we need to change the trajectory of humanity with technology. We humans do need to take back control of technology and more generally to take back control of the planet from big tech. But how is it going to work if we compare it to the nuclear non-proliferation treaty? That hasn't been a complete success. There are a number of nations who have gone ahead despite that treaty and developed their own nuclear weapons. I'm thinking of India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea initially signed the treaty and has withdrawn from it and has developed dangerous weapons. So it's dangerous enough. But there are, I think, three factors with AI that make things even more complicated. The first is it's reasonably easy to spot when people have got nuclear enriched materials, but AIs are much harder to monitor. Second, AI is already being widely shared via open source. There's a whole spirit around that open source is the way to go, and people are sharing their latest models almost in a reckless way. And then third, there's so much pressure on people to, as it were, break the treaty, because if they can actually succeed with their new AIs, with their AGIs, they stand, they think, to be huge victors in forthcoming commercial races. The companies that really succeed with the next generation AI will be the wealthiest corporations ever. So these three factors seem to me to complicate how this treaty might work. So how do you envision it working?
Yeah, those are all correct issues. I've thought about that a lot, and it's kind of disheartening to think of it like this. I think the nuclear agreements are by and large working, even though we have violations. We have, but again, they're probably easier to police and to respond with. But the main thing about artificial intelligence, I think, really is this challenge that we have to agree on the underlying economic paradigm, because nuclear weapons and nuclear energy isn't so much about money. You could probably make money with nuclear weapons, but it's not a great business to sell nuclear weapons. And so the incentive there is about power, clearly military power. And that is big enough. But here we have the incentive to be the king of the market, to rule literally in the sense of money, right? And money is power, clearly, and vice versa. So this is a much bigger problem now that we have this, basically saying, okay, we can quintuple GDP eventually with AGI, and whoever is first will rule the planet and the universe, of course. We're actually going to rule the universe, right? The moon and everything there is to it. But this is a huge financial carrot. Really? So my view is this: if we're not going to change the underlying financial paradigm of what we want to achieve, we're likely to fail with this, as we have failed with climate change. But with climate change, we're no longer really failing. We're waking up, and because like I said yesterday in our conversation, the shit is hitting the fan with climate change, global warming. So there we have to react, and we are doing it. Right? But with AGI, the money is so big, and the money pervades power, that it's just such a huge carrot, and this is the primary problem. If we are going to say, we don't just care about money, we also care about people, planet, purpose, humanity, then we're going to be ready to say, we could make lots of money turning humans into machines and machines into humans. We can make lots of money with that. And then that argument will be less powerful. So we have to tackle the underlying problem, which is that, the capitalist system structure as we know it is unfit for this future. We need sustainable capitalism, Al Gore, but sustainable in the human sense. So if you can make a few trillions by building digital humans, Blade Runner model, basically, then people will do it. And so now it's all going to be about the question, do we let the free market do this, as Mark Andreessen is suggesting in his pamphlet about digital optimism and AI optimism and the accelerationists and all these kind of things, right? Do we let that prevail and say, let's go and just maximize? That will be our end. Or do we switch to a new economic model of the 4 Ps, as I call it, people, planet, purpose, prosperity, which may be just as naive as the idea of barring AGI. I don't know. We have to talk about that. But this is the underlying paradigm. The second answer to this really is we're going to do something about the power of AI, not just the power of technology, which is a general different discussion, but that I think we can. The power of AGI, we're only going to do something really strong on this when, again, the shit hits the fan there, right? And it will. I think that is basically my conclusion of this topic, how we're going to get a trigger. We need a trigger moment. And, now we have trigger moments every summer when it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And people in Egypt and where, those kind of places are already basically dying from heat. And now we're going to see that with AI, a stock market crash, maybe air traffic control systems crashing, online payment systems being hacked with AI, and, rigged elections and what have you. We're going to see those things, and then maybe we'll find some sense. But I'm much more optimistic on this than most people. I think that we are capable of collaboration. We are capable of making mistakes and then fixing it. Whether we can make mistakes for the AGI, that's a different question. We probably can't, as Kiva was saying, we don't get to try again. So, yeah, I think it's a big mission. We really need to start kind of a movement of saying, and this is, I think, crucial for our futurist colleagues as well. We need to embrace technology and make it use technology to such a way to solve our practical problems. Aging, disease, water, food, and so on. But if we embrace technology to take over from us, what is the point? If we use technology to enslave us, to become the second most intelligent species, that strikes me as just utterly bad policy. The only reason to do that is to make lots of money and then live somewhere else where you're not touched by it. And I kind of suspect that is the strategy of Mark Andreessen and Elon Musk and people like that. So, So, shall we bring in a comment from the crowd here, or let's say, okay, just pick one and bring it in to see if we can have this comment. Yeah, okay.
That was the comment I saw earlier by Per Osberg, which I asked about. We don't seem to be great at following treaties, and you talked about climate change. You drew some
but David, I
encouragement. But here's the thing that there are parts of the world that don't go with the climate change message. They are reacting against the warnings by saying, oh, this is nothing unusual. There are fires, but hey, we've always had fires. And by the way, we're just being careless with our forestry management. We are being careless with how we're building cities. That's why there's more floods. In other words,
but here's the thing about
profits.
Yeah, David, here's the thing about treaties, though. It's like you can say that a lot of them being violated or become kind of less powerful and so on. But the answer ultimately is we're still better off with the treaties than without the treaties. And some are much more enforceable than others. Like the ozone treaty is super enforced and with heavy penalties. And it's kind of a perversion when you think about it that if you make money, you fabricate fake money. Then, there's huge penalty. You go to jail for 10 years for just making a copy of a printed dollar bill or something. But if you make a copy of a person, it's applauded on social media. And those are things that we can easily make small treaties about. What are the penalties? What are the incentives? Because I think it's really important to realize that humans, because we are simplistic in this way, we need incentives and we need penalties and we need social contract that says, if you do that, then you're a bad guy. I don't want to have anything to do with you. And this is super important, I think, especially in these treaties. Yes, we have people violating nuclear agreements, and like Israel kind of is a murky topic. We don't really know what to say about that. And we have a clear opinion on North Korea, of course. That's much easier. But so there are borderline cases, but by and large, the treaty has brought us peace since it happened. But it took 14 years. This is why I think this ridiculous idea of the Manhattan Project for AI, we know where that is going. That's going to go to the same place than the original Manhattan Project, which is to use whatever we have created in a hurry under all priority, because that's really that's our sort of root instinct, right, is to dominate. And I think this is really right now, the next 5 years are so crucial until 2030, is to start a movement for technology, but against domination of technology. And to differentiate that is a tough mission, I think that is, because a lot of people don't see the difference between those stances,
It is hard to know what's good AI and what's bad AI, because after all, most bits of AI is sort of neutral. It could be combined into good products, or it can equally be combined into bad products. For example, there was an AI that was able to suggest new drugs, new antibiotics, and so on, which was coming up by studying chemistry, by studying a whole bunch of data about the properties of different molecules. It was able to suggest, why don't you humans investigate these compounds? But then, just as an idea, one of the scientists changed the parameters and said, well, let's use the same software with one change to come up with new poisons. And they were horrified at how many new poisons were generated by the system. And so knowing what technology is likely to be safe and what technology could instead be used to burn things down is hard. So how can we draw these lines clearly?
Well, I think the European AI Act from the European Commission may be clumsy. It may be another GDPR in a fancier version. You can say many bad things about the bureaucracy in Brussels and so on, but I think, it points in the right direction. Where we're saying, okay, there's 4 levels of AI that are clearly staged, and then we have to look at the products to see what they are. The worst level is like social monitoring and social credit scoring and that kind of thing. And I think we can fairly easily delineate good use and bad use with a couple of borderline cases, but clearly protein folding and medication development and all that stuff, that's a very good thing, right? Developing a weapon that can kill by themselves, so you can have the perfect drone to realize that David is an enemy of the state and needs to be eliminated at the next possible opportunity, and you can kill as many as 20 people while you're doing that, and all that is in software. Like, come on, you must be joking. I mean, we can delineate that, like stopping AI-based weapons. I mean, those are very clear-cut things, yeah. And the UK of all countries is one of them manufacturing those kind of systems, yeah.
Is it really so clear-cut? Because many people in the security forces, they will say they need good monitoring. There are terrorists in this world. We need to be able to monitor what's going on with drones and other surveillance.
I totally agree that we need that. There are bad people in the world and we have to deal with them, and we have to have the weapons to do so. Clearly, even though I'm more of a pacifist in that regard, given that I was a member of the Green Party when I was a younger man. But, I'm more on that side of things with Joschka Fischer and those people in the Green Party a long time ago. But basically, I agree with the argument there. But the thing is, what is humanized? What is warfare that is humanly acceptable, even with the worst possible party receiving the threat, right? There is things that we just don't do that could also backfire. For example, automating weapons could easily be hacked to be automated to turn around against us, and other things like that. So this is a more sort of dark topic that I think we should probably not talk about. But, I believe we could delineate some of the obvious things. the things that are not okay, just like we do in, with war crimes and those kind of things, that, not everything is okay just because it's war. And all these kind of things are not generally unknown. So I think we could do that. It would be hard. We need a different gremium. And I'm really disgruntled with what's happening with the UN here in so many ways, not because of the UN doing anything wrong, or, Antonio Guterres is really a great speaker, and he really nails things very nicely. And he's doing a great job, as are many organizations that work with the UN. But the question is, in the 50s and 60s, the UN was insurmountable. It was huge. It was influencing everything. And where are they now? Now people are saying, okay, well, no matter what the UN says, we do this, And OpenAI probably has more influence on the development of AGI than the UN. And I think we got to do something about this. We need to step this up. We need to have a council of the wise people. And we need to have a movement of this. This is so crucial.
If we're talking about reasons to be positive, we may not be so inspired by what's happening at the UN. And I share your despair sometimes that they are slow moving. There is so much virtue signaling at their meetings. Instead of looking at the more detailed technical proposals, we have whole meetings full up of people from their country saying, our country believes in justice. Our country believes in eliminating bias. And without saying, how are they going to do it? But isn't there a more positive thing, which is what happened after the Bletchley Park meeting in the UK in November last year? One of the good things that our former Prime Minister in the UK, Rishi Sunak, put in place. And after that, there was a sort of meeting, scientific committee chaired by Yoshua Bengio, whose remarks featured very well in your earlier presentation. And they set out to try and clarify what are the real risks? What's the scientific understanding of the risks of AI? And that seems to be encouraging to me. And not only did they have one meeting in London, or rather in Bletchley Park beside Milton Keynes in the UK. They've had a follow-up based largely in Seoul in South Korea in May this year. And there's another one scheduled later this year in France. I want to urge people to find out what Yoshua Bengio has written in that report. It seems to me a good basis for understanding what the risks are. And that brings us to the topic of education. Perhaps we can put the comment by Graham David Baird in, because he highlights that he thinks education is going to be a key of helping how we can share a richer understanding to everybody of what the complexities are here. It's my only view that every serious discussion about the better future turns into a discussion about a better education. And AI can actually help us to educate, but we're going to need to fight hard to make sure that the most important understanding of risks is shared more widely.
Yeah, I think the education thing is, of course, it's a huge, passionate topic for me. I do believe that education is something that is happening between humans. And I think AI can be vastly helpful for information and data and visualization and those kind of things. But the idea of getting answers from an AI, I think it's a far-fetched principle. I think we can get answers, but then we need to, make something out of it. Education is such a big thing. And right now, the really disturbing thing is that a lot of people between, say, 17, 18, and 40 are disgruntled with the future. Especially in Europe, they're saying the future is going to be terrible. Many people in Europe, I think 70% of millennials are saying they won't have kids because the future is bad. And that is kind of that's not a good outlook, because Barbara Hubbard, Barbara Marx Hubbard, the futurist, she said, as you see the future, so you act. As you act, so you become. A self-fulfilling prophecy. And we need to fix that. And this is why one of the things that I'm working on is the Good Future Project, and the Good Future idea is to create a global campaign for the good future. Says, despite of all these things, we can have a good future. And it's amazing how many things we're inventing. Like Kevin Kelly said, we should be optimists, not just because we have less problems, we don't have less problems, but because we have more solutions, more capacity. And that is just so crucial. We get this message out to have hope, because we're not idiots, we're not all murderers, we're not all evil. There are some evil people, yes, and we're genius in inventing stuff. So, the only thing that is hard for us is to collaborate and to get on the same page. Or the only thing, parentheses, right? We have to teach that to younger people, because as they are making their choices for jobs, they will make choices to work for those kind of companies or not work for those kind of companies, and to vote in a certain way. I'm absolutely certain by the end of the next couple of years, let's say the next 5 years, we're going to see millennials and Gen Y in charge more than ever before, and they're going to want different things and different policies, and that policy will not be based on utopia or dystopia, but on a more balanced view of life, and that will go also for AI. So I'm having big hopes for the Gen Y people.
After all, we have seen in the climate change world big impetus from people who were school age. The strikes that took place, was it on Friday? Greta Thunberg and many others around the world have spoken out more clearly about the risk and have changed. Do you see similar things happening in the world of AI safety? When I look at just a couple of organizations to mention, Pause AI, which is trying to campaign with public demonstrations, public street protests that we should be slowing down. There's Control AI, which has strong determination to influence politicians that they will take action. And there's your own initiative. Try to remember its name on AGI.
Hold AGI.
Yes.
And I called it deny AGI before, but I think halting is, I think that we discussed it some other time about, the basic underlying challenge here is that we can say, okay, we should pause AI, which I think is kind of a bit of a screen, for that discussion. To halt AGI, superintelligence, I think it's more feasible and more sort of understandable. But really the underlying thing underneath that is the halting capitalism kind of idea. Pausing AGI would mean pausing the quest for money, pausing the quest for power. That's really what we're talking about here, because, to say that let's pause arms race and wait for that to be mutually beneficial, I think that's a tough one. But if the alternative is demise, then I think it may be more obvious. And we're going to see things just like climate change. We're going to see incidents in the next couple of years that will make people take to the streets when it's about AI. For example, the idea of having robots and the humanoid robots, basically the Black Mirror scenario, the human scenario from the various movies that we know, becoming more of a reality, and people are building relationships with their bots and intelligent assistants that are basically running our lives, and then a lot of things going wrong. And, all these kind of things will happen, and they are already happening. For example, a lot of big companies are using a system called Higher View, where you're sitting in front of the camera, which is hooked up to an AI, and the AI does the interview with you to measure who you really are. To which I would say, a company that does that, for me to work there, I'd never even consider. Because not that the technology can't have benefits, it can, but it's an utterly ridiculous assumption that I'm going to pass this test with a damn robot, That reminds me of the Fifth Dimension. Remember that movie? We had a bunch of those scenes in it. But anyway, so I think all these things while happening, we're going to see, this thing, Extinction Rebellion, UK phenomena, that's going to be a global 100x. Some violent, some not, some more economic, some more political in the next few years. And following on the heels of this, when we see more AI in place that's messing things up and not doing a good job and trying to venture out further than it should, we're going to see that as well as part of this Extinction Rebellion conversation. After all, this is about sustainability, not just environmental, but human sustainability. These issues kind of belong together. Let's bring in another comment here from, how about Eleonora Nelson? That's, I think, a fairly lengthy comment about, can't really see it very well here, but let's bring in the comment there. Yeah. So the concerns about job placement, ethical bias, and so on that she's mentioning here, which is great. And so responsible development, Yeah, so this is a key word for me, responsible development. I think right now I feel like we're being irresponsible, not because we're necessarily evil or, have evil intention, but it's a whole lot like what we did in the industrial economy. We wanted to have machines that ran on gas, and so we needed more gas and oil, and we put up more coal plants, and we knew what was happening. Shell Oil and everybody else knew since the 60s what's happening with climate change and global warming. But instead, we said, okay, let's get the priorities straight here. We need to drive this truck and fly airplanes, and here we are. Right? And thankfully, we can do something about that. But if we do the same with AI and say, okay, we need more intelligence, we need more efficiency, we need more, and we definitely do need that, right? And then we don't look at the consequences, then we're going to end up in the same place, except for it might be potentially irreversible in the sense of what we allow machines to do.
If we look at the example of OpenAI here, OpenAI was founded with great motivations. It was founded to be a non-profit. It was founded to share its research openly. But what turned out to be the case is they realized they needed more money to support their research. They needed a lot more money. And so they turned by stages into a for-profit organization, and they have closed down many of what they previously did in terms of sharing. And isn't this another example that if we just leave it to existing corporations, they may start off with good intentions. They may start off with a desire to do all the good things that Eleonora talks about, but they may be constrained. They won't pursue the people and planet and purpose, the 3 Ps you talk about. They'll pursue the profits, the power, the populist agenda. So I think this means, I don't think we can pause capitalism. I think we need to have much more democratic oversight. We need to have the governments of the world, the people of the world telling these large corporations, you can't just do what you like. You need to get, a bit like companies releasing drugs. You can't just release any other drug you like. It needs to be vetted by an independent body, the FDA, or now we talk about an AI Safety Institute. So I think that's the priority. We've got to get an AI Safety Institute, not full up with bureaucrats, not full up of paper pushers, made with many of the world's best technical minds. We must pay them enough to persuade them to leave their big, well-paid jobs inside big tech and get them on board so that we stop what these big tech companies are doing.
I think with many of these things, it's really not this kind of black or white, can we do it, can we not do it? It's like, okay, if you're going to have 4 paradigms, people, planet, purpose, prosperity, then if you're a company or a country or a politician or whatever, you make different choices at different times. And sometimes that's mostly about prosperity because that's the choice you need at that moment. Sometimes it's mostly about people. You can't rank 10 on all of those all the time. That's not possible, right? But you have a balanced strategy, and that's what it's all about. So at one point you say, this is really important that we take care of people and planet, and you forego a project like IBM said, 10 years ago, we're not going to get involved with face recognition anymore because it's mostly used by governments to track down the citizens and put them to jail. And later on they came back to it again. But you make those decisions based on a holistic view, and this is what I'm proposing. I'm not proposing that we always put everything first except for the money, I mean, we have to be realistic. We live in a capitalist system. In Europe, we're sort of in a social capitalist system. And in the future, we'll hopefully have a sustainable capitalism. But to have a holistic view, right, it means we have all the options, we make choices. It's not inevitable that AI will take over just because it theoretically could. We make those choices, and we make the choices every day. And we make choices that are good for us as humans, not good for us as shareholders, or people holding stock or people investing billions. It's always a mixed bag. And this is really what every government is up against and up for, really. Like in Brazil, Lula has to face choices. He's going to get $200 billion from the oil companies to drill off the coast of Brazil. He's arguing, I need the money to put the climate back into the agenda, which of course is a very tough decision. I wouldn't know what to do about that, but you always make those choices. And then in the end, it comes down to what is your guiding paradigm? Is your guiding paradigm a new kind of capitalism, if you could even call it that, a future fit kind of Star Trek economy? I don't know. What is, what is the destination? And I think Europe is in a good destination. I would include the UK in that definition of the destination. Is that, we're looking at a more balanced approach, as, it's not just a happiness through technology. And, you will not find happiness in the cloud or with more tech. These are sort of hedonistic things. And we use them to trigger things about how we can potentially be happy or to connect to each other, but they don't have purpose in themselves. So we need to have a larger story here that's more holistic. And I think this is what the whole debate is all about. We can go down the simple path and say, you implant your technology into your life and your body and everything, and then it kind of slowly takes over, and that alleviates the need to be human. I think, I'm not so happy with that definition, and I think this is why we have this discrepancy between, the transhumanist movement and the singularity movement is very happy about AGI, right? Because it's obviously a fit. And so Silicon Valley,
very, very strongly in their views on AGI. Most of them are like me. Most of them say we can have a very wonderful future, a sustainable superabundance, but only if we wisely manage AI. And I'm not sure we should build AGI. We certainly shouldn't build it until we're sure that it's safe. So I think we need to.
I think that is some of our work. Yeah. I think that's the bottom line, really. It's like if we can distinguish between the different levels, IA, AI, and AGI, and if we have safeguards and that sort of perforated line that I was showing earlier, and if we have I think that is the way to go. And this is really what we need. We need to be able to have GDP growth without emissions, which is also a problem for AI, of course, right? And at the same time, we don't want to be out of control because when you have the need for growth, yeah. So that takes a balanced view. And where are we going to get that balanced view? I think, I'm pinning my hope on Europe and the UK. I'm not pinning my hope on America and China for this. Right?
There's some insights from Australia and New Zealand and South Africa and India as well. Yeah. We've got some of them making great comments in their LinkedIn and on YouTube as we speak. So I think we've got to build a new world coalition of the willing to build this sustainable superabundance, an abundance with more, a sustainability with more rather than sustainability with less. But it's more of the human flourishing rather than more efficiency or more information.
Yeah, it's just, I think this is just like climate change as we go up. We want to be able to disconnect GDP growth and general growth and longevity and stuff from emissions. Right, so basically emissions will go down and everything else goes up, And with AI, we want the same thing. We want more intelligence. We want more usefulness. We want more results. At the same time, we don't want humanity to decline. We want humanity to go up in parallel. And I think it's entirely possible. And so, so that's my proposal, and I hope people will join this thinking. And I'm putting together a global campaign. To show the future as good. We'll call this a Good Future campaign. And I'm working on some ideas for an ad campaign on this. I'm talking to some sponsors about going behind the Good Future campaign. It's much like what we did in what was done in New York in the 70s and 80s, the I Love New York campaign, the ad campaign, which clearly nobody loved New York in the 80s. And then this agency came up with the idea, I love New York, right? So I want to start a campaign that's called I Love the Future, and to make arguments as to why that is important, that we don't lose hope on the future that we can achieve with all the great things that we're inventing.
The future can be much better than most people think, but it is up to us. I don't think it's going to happen if we are distracted, if we fail to pay attention, or if we satisfy ourselves with rather glib or naive pronouncements. I think it is tough. You're entirely right. But hey, if we tap into this big network of human brains with some assistance from well-defined, well-trusted nano AIs, I think we can figure out what to do stage by stage. It's going to be complicated, but this is the most important task facing us.
Absolutely. And I'm with the definition that Kevin Kelly again put forth the other day when some time ago, 12 years ago, I think, when he says this is not about utopia or dystopia, it's about what he calls protopia. a stepwise approach into a good future. And that is kind of the program. And this is what we have to get into. And I think this is what needs to be discussed at the UN Summit of the Future and at other places about how we're going to get there to create new hope. So I want to thank you very much for being part of this, David. Everybody also that is on the comment feed and all the people watching on YouTube and LinkedIn, we're going to have a production of this whole thing. So we'll have two things. We'll have my speech and a nice 4K video on YouTube, and then we'll have our conversation as a separate cut. And it'll be on GerdTube, gerdtube.com, which is, of course, where you are right now on my YouTube channel. So that's where you go. David, how can people find out about, you have a book, right, that you wrote that you want to recommend, I think?
Well, I'll point to the singularity principles, anticipating and managing cataclysmically disruptive technologies. This is possible, but only if we put principles first rather than pursuit of profit or power.
Great. And, I have a very substantial book list. Bring up the QR code, please. I have a Dropmark folder that you can use. So you see here on the top right, just scan that code and you'll see my book list. And we discussed this briefly on the last session, but basically the three books I recommend. First one is Kim Stanley Robinson, The Ministry for the Future, the best book about the good future, which actually ends well in 2030. So, and funnily enough, Kim's book, KSR book, is taking place in Zurich and the Hochstrasse, which is one block from where I live. So I know that's kind of a weird coincidence, but anyway, read that book. And the other one I like a lot is Stuart Russell, who I mentioned earlier in my video, Human Compatible, probably the best book about AI, if you want to understand the further context. And then Rutger Bregman, Humankind, which is about the question if humans are evil or not. You can tell by the title that he doesn't think we're evil, so Humankind. And if you go to scan the code here, you end up on the page with hundreds of books that I have reviewed and that I'm in the process of reading, most of them at the same time. And my own book, of course, Technology versus Humanity, which is now 7 years old, but still reads very much like yesterday. So anyway, thanks very much again, and I hope to see you on this channel and in other places in the very near future. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks again to David. Thanks for everybody else to comment and spread the word, and I'll see you in the good future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.